Hey, what's up? Today, I'm gonna show you guys 7 techniques that I learned working in restaurants to make chicken breast taste good. All 7 are easy to implement and practically free. And I'm willing to bet at least a few of these techniques will take you by surprise, especially 4 and 7. The first method is one that I've mentioned a few times before. It's called jacquarding. Jacquarding uses a process called mechanical tenderization to make the chicken breast more perceivably tender by physically breaking down the protein structure of the meat. You can jacquard meat at home 2 ways. The first is by using a relatively sharp fork and poking the meat, or you could buy a specific jacquarding tool. The second is what I would recommend because jacquarding tools are cheap and in my experience they work better than a fork. With either tool, what you're doing is punching the breast meat full of hundreds of tiny little holes. This ends up shortening the protein fiber and basically does some of the work that your teeth do during chewing, but before cooking. I like to jacquard breast meat when using high temp direct heat cooking methods like sauteing or grilling. When you're cooking with such a forceful heat, the muscles contract really quickly, and this causes a ton of moisture to be squeezed out. But after jacquarding, the chicken breast's muscle fibers are shorter, which means that they contract less and squeeze out less moisture during cooking. Jacquards are also great for breasts because they create hundreds of tiny little holes that allow brines or marinades to penetrate deeper into the meat. As we'll see in a second, that's an important part of making breasts more tasty. With jacquarding though, more is definitely not more. If you stab up the meat too much, you create too many escape routes for moisture to drip out during cooking, and too much jacquarding destroys the meat's structure, which will make it feel mealy and gross in your mouth.
It's like eating a ground chicken patty.
For breasts, I usually like to jacquard 6 to 8 times per side if I'm using the tool, or about 25 times if I'm using a fork. I always jacquard breast meat for recipes like shish kebabs, grilled chicken breast, chicken sandwiches, chicken cutlets, or anytime I want to enjoy just a straight up nice piece of chicken breast. Okay, the next technique to impress with breasts is pounding to make thinner. Just like jacquarding, pounding is a mechanical tenderization technique where you are literally smushing apart the tight protein fibers in the meat, leaving them looser, softer, and more perceivably tender. The other main benefit of pounding thin is neutralizing the breast's natural taper. This gives the breasts an even thickness, which means that every part of the chicken breast will cook to the same temperature at the same time. This is the whole ball game with breasts, you guys. With evenly thick breasts, there's no dry edges or raw middle to worry about. You'll just have juicy, perfectly cooked meat all the way through. Also, because the meat is thinner, pounding it speeds up the cooking process, which shortens the amount of time that the breast meat is exposed to heat. That means that there's less time for the heat to contract the muscle fibers, so less moisture is squeezed out. The best way to do this technique is to slide a breast into a freezer bag, then gently but firmly hit it with a heavy bottom pot or a meat mallet. I think it's easiest to pound the thicker side mostly and to leave the thin side alone. This brings the thicker side down to the thickness of the thin side, and it limits the overall impact on the muscle itself. I also love to combine pounding with jacquarding to get the benefits of both methods. The combination here is basically the only way that I'll grill and sear chicken breast these days. The jacquard does the work of making the meat more tender, and the pounding gives me a form factor that makes it really easy to cook the breast into the tiny temperature window where it's actually good, 150 to 155F. Just like for the jacquard though, don't go crazy with pounding because it'll beat up the meat too much and give it a mealy texture. Anyways, 90% of the chicken breast that I cook these days is pounded thin. That's how essential it is to making chicken breast taste good. Check out our recipe for pounded chicken cutlets linked in the description. The next move that I use to make chicken breasts suck less is called brining, of which there are 2 types, dry brining and wet brining. Dry brining is the process of adding salt directly to the surface of meat, and wet brining is where you dissolve that salt into water to create, you know, a brine. With dry brining, the salt on the surface of the meat pulls out a bunch of moisture. That then dissolves the salt, making a natural brine. Then through osmosis, that brine gets pulled back into the meat, seasoning the entire breast throughout. This makes it taste really good. But more importantly, salt on the outside of the meat denatures protein. This means that it kind of unwinds it and makes it a little bit more tender, but also makes it hold on to a lot more moisture during cooking. To properly dry brine breast meat, I like to take the weight of the meat in grams and hit it with 1% salt. So for 4 250 gram chicken breasts or 1,000 grams worth of meat, I would add 10 grams of salt. Wet brining follows the same basic scientific principles of osmosis and denatured protein, but instead of salting your chicken directly, you're dunking it in a salty bath. Then through osmosis, the chicken pulls in both salt and water, which creates a juicier, plumper result than dry brining. For wet brine, I usually go with 5% of salt by weight of the amount of water that I'm using. So for 1,000 grams of water, I'll use 50 grams of salt. Then I'll drop in the chicken breast for about 1 to 2 hours, dry off really well, then let it rip. For either type of brine, I usually like to sneak in a little bit of sugar and some other seasoning like spices or herbs. Salt alone is rarely enough to make chicken breast compelling, but it is the main thing that you need other than a proper internal temperature to make chicken breast taste good. I'll list my recipes for dry and wet poultry brines down in the description if you're interested. Now, the next technique that I like to use to make chicken breast taste good is going to sound pretty mental to some of you guys. It's called poaching, and it requires us to cook chicken in hot water. That sounds really dumb, I know, but it works, trust me. Speaking of working, look at the work that I'm putting in on this treadmill from the sponsor of this vid, Everon Active. Everon Active makes gamified exercise equipment, and I just got their treadmill. You're probably thinking, so what, a treadmill? I've used one of those before. Well, you haven't used one like this. Regular treadmills make me feel like I'm being tortured. This treadmill is fun. A lot of fun, actually. Everon Active includes a ton of different features to make running on this treadmill a genuinely nice experience. I used to hate running indoors so much, but now I actually look forward to it. With this Everon treadmill, you can use the built-in apps and games to run through immersive landscapes, unlock achievements, or race against your past self. You can take on-demand fitness classes or play games with other real people in real time. It just turns running into something that you'll enjoy, which means that you'll probably do it more. My favorite part of this treadmill, besides watching my favorite YouTuber on the 22-inch display, is how comfortable it is. The deck is super low to the ground. It has plenty of built-in shock absorption, which is really easy on my knees and lower back. If treadmills aren't your thing, Everon Active also has a gamified bike and rower. Right now, you can get 50 bucks off Everon Active products when you use my code BRINE50 at checkout. Again, 50 bucks off with code BRINE50. The link is in the description. Back to the water technique. You've probably heard of poaching in the context of poached eggs, and poaching chicken breast is more or less the same process. Poaching is a moist cooking method where you use seasoned water that's hot but not boiling to gently cook something. Boiling something takes place around 212 of course, but when you poach something, you're using cooking liquid that's closer to 160 to 180 F. What poaching does that boiling doesn't is it converts raw protein to cooked very, very gently. This makes a chicken breast that's much juicier and more tender. Using the higher heat of boiling on chicken would make the proteins contract super quickly, and that would squeeze out all of the moisture and bind up the proteins into tight networks that are very hard to chew. You can imagine what it would be like to eat a boiled breast. No one wants that.
It's like eating a rope.
On the other hand, breast meat that's been poached in water that's 40 to 50 degrees cooler is much more succulent and soft. That's juicy. Ooh. I think most people would be surprised that water can make chicken taste good. When it comes to dishes like chicken salad, chicken soup, buff chicken dip, or basically anything where the goal is just perfectly cooked, plain old chicken, poaching is the way to go. To poach 2 medium breasts, start with a large pot of water. Bring that up to about 180 F, then add in quite a lot of salt. It shouldn't be ocean salty, but you can be pretty aggressive. Then I'll lower the heat on my burner and drop in my breasts. Bonus points for dry or wet brining these before cooking. By the way, the fridge temperature of the breast should lower the water temperature from about 180 to 160. 20 minutes later, my breasts have been very gently cooked through. To determine doneness, I'll insert an instant read into the thickest part, and when they read 150 to 155 F, I'll call them good and rest for 10 minutes before using. The main thing that poaching lacks over other techniques is that there's no browning or Maillard reaction. That's why I save poaching for dishes where that flavor isn't required, and instead use it for dishes where chicken is more of a part of the whole thing, like in soup or chicken salad. Poaching is definitely not a process that's going to add flavor to the chicken like grilling or marination would, but it does the best job of any other cooking technique that I know of removing the least from the chicken. The gentleness of the poach is minimally invasive, and it doesn't stress out the very delicate, very lean meat. If you want a couple recipes to see how to practically use poached chicken in a final dish, I'll link to my buffalo chicken dip and chicken salad 3 ways video in the description. The next technique you've probably heard of. It's called dredging, and it involves taking a chicken breast and covering it in some kind of starch or flour. Also, Lauren really didn't want me to be dangling a raw piece of meat in this video, but now this is the second time I've done it. To do it, once the chicken is seasoned up and preferably pounded thin, I'll toss the breast in a little bit of flour, all-purpose or gluten-free cup for cup would totally work. Then I'll dust it off and lay it into a medium heat pan with a generous layer of oil in the bottom. Dredging meat gives it an exterior layer of carbs that combine with the protein and assist in the overall Maillard browning reaction. This flour also creates a barrier on the outside of the meat that helps seal in the chicken's juices. Since the flour helps the meat hold onto its moisture, I don't need to worry about nailing 155 F. Instead, I can just determine doneness based on the level of browning that I like.
I knew that this technique works because I've done it a lot, but every time I'm surprised. This is so juicy and so flavorful. That little thin veneer of flour on the outside makes it taste just a little bit like fried chicken. Man.
Dredged breasts are usually paired up with a nice pan sauce like marsala or piccata, and the leftover flour actually lends a hand in thickening and adding body to the sauce. If you guys want a chicken marsala recipe where you can see dredging in full force, check out my video from last year, linked in the description. Now, a way to take a step up from a simple dredge is to move on to a full-on 3-stage breading process. This method starts with a simple flour dredge just like before, but adds 2 more steps to make the chicken more juicy and more interesting to eat. After a flour dusting, the dredged chicken goes into egg wash. I'll move that around, get it totally covered, then drain off the excessive eggs, and then move the chicken breast over into some kind of breading, like breadcrumbs or crackers. This 3-layer breading is full of starch and proteins, which when combined during cooking will brown up and crisp up beautifully, giving us a deliciously crunchy exterior. But more importantly, the crust is going to be formed around the chicken, so it adds an insulating shell that protects the meat from the peak heating of the 350F cooking fat. Also, you'll get a better outcome if you combine this technique with the second and third and potentially first techniques I listed in this video. Breading your chicken breast might be something that you only do once in a while, but keep it in the toolkit because it's one of the better ways to make chicken breast delicious. The last technique in this video is also the best technique. It's a Chinese process called velveting. Wow. Velveting is a 2-step process. First, you coat the chicken in a protective layer of starch and protein that's semi-alkaline. Then you blanch the meat in water or oil to set that coating. This seals in the chicken's moisture. To velvet some chicken, I'll take 2 medium breasts and slice them thinly into strips that are about 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch thick. That'll yield me about 450 grams or 1 pound's worth. Then I'll marinate in 1 egg white, 15 grams of neutral oil, 10 grams of cornstarch, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and about 5 grams of salt. By the way, baking soda isn't always used in velveting, but I like to add it because it makes the mixture even more alkaline, which makes the meat even more tender. Be careful though, because more than 1/4 teaspoon per pound of baking soda will make the meat taste weird and will make it super soft and mushy. Once the meat's been marinated for 20 minutes, I'll move over to a wok or sauce pot full of 2 to 3 quarts of boiling water, then add in a very long squeezer of oil. This will help the starchy pieces stay separate once cooking. Then I'll just drop in all of my starched marinated chicken and blanch it for about 60 to 90 seconds. In Chinese restaurants, they usually do this blanching in oil at temps around 350F. I use water because it's just as effective as oil, makes a lot less mess, it's safer, and I don't need to worry about disposing of a big wok full of oil. After 90 seconds, the meat should have plumped up by about 50% and it should be cooked through. From here, I'm going to move it over to a plate to hang out until I'm ready to drop it into my final dish. After this blanching step, the meat is basically indestructible. That outer layer of starch and protein insulated the meat during cooking, which prevented moisture loss. Also, the alkaline nature of the marinade denatured the protein fibers so that as the meat cooked, the muscle fibers contracted much slower and the baking soda helped inhibit the bonding of those proteins.
It is super tender and super juicy. I mean that, I'm not exaggerating. I really don't understand how it works, but I can't conceive of chicken being juicier and more tender than it is in my mouth right now.
Now to turn this chicken into a dish, I'll throw it into some very hot oil in my wok and stir fry for a couple minutes to bring in some browning. Then I'll add in a standard issue stir fry sauce. In this case, it's equal parts soy, mirin, and chicken stock, along with 5 to 10 grams of cornstarch. From here, I'll just bring that up to a simmer and reduce until things are thick. You could also add in vegetables here or noodles, whatever you want.
You would have no idea that that was just ripped in like a 475-degree wok. It is still just as tender as it was before.
Velveting is just a very potent technique for making breast meat taste better, but it also works well for beef. If you want to see a practical recipe for velveting, check out my beef and broccoli video linked in the description. Also, let me know in the comments which chicken breast technique you guys think I missed out on, or let me know which one of these techniques you're going to be using in dinner tonight.